Even as the Army itself has evolved and changed in recent years, so too has the role of women in the force. Where once the Army's female soldiers served only in administrative and medical positions far behind the lines, today's Army women also serve in such non-traditional functions as transportation, maintenance, intelligence, and aviation. Numbering almost 70,000 as of September 1994 and holding ranks from private to general, women are integral to the strength and readiness of America's Army.
I think because of all the initiatives the Army took to promote women in the service and to make sure that we were given equal opportunities, we've made a lot of progress.
I've been exposed to so many different and wonderful things, people, opportunities, responsibilities, that when I talk with my friends out in the workforce, they don't compare. And when I explain to them what I have done and what is in store for me, I mean, they're really amazed.
I think the Army as a whole gives you, definitely as a leader in the Army, it's given me leadership skills. It's given me discipline. It's given me a sense of self that I can take to any job that I go to.
I'm Sandra Van Oker, your host for America's Army. Joining me today to examine the role of women in the Army are Brigadier General R. Dennis Kerr, Director of Human Resources for the Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel in the Pentagon, Lieutenant Colonel Megan Jans, Aviation Program Officer for the Office of the Chief of Legislative Liaison, also in the Pentagon, and Master Sergeant Ramey Woodrow, Battalion Operations and Training Non-Commissioned Officer in Charge, or NCOIC, for the 742nd Military Intelligence Battalion of the 704 Military Intelligence Brigade, Fort Meade, Maryland. General, lead off with you. What percentage of soldiers on active duty are women?
Right now it's about 13%. 12.9% of our active force is female. Matter of fact, the total, or America's Army, which includes the Guard, Reserve, and active force, also adds up to about 13%. The reserves are actually a lot higher, about 21%, but the Guard brings that figure down because they only have about 8% female. The Guard, of course, has a lot of combat forces, and with the combat forces, that restricts the numbers of females that can serve in those units, as opposed to the Reserve, which is mostly combat support and combat service support. That increases the opportunity. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but 13% is what our total force and our active force are about.
How does the Army compare to the other services in opportunities for women?
Well, the Air Force has 99.7% of their positions open to women, but their role is not direct ground combat. However, their total active force is about 15% female. The Navy has about 94 to 95% of their positions open to females. Again, their mission is not direct ground combat. They have 11% female. The Army has got 13% female, and the Marine Corps, who also is involved in direct ground combat, they have about 4%, a little over 4% female.
As objectively as you can look at it, can a woman find the same opportunities as a man in America's Army?
We have more battalion commanders today than we've ever had before. We have 5 current brigade commanders. There are restrictions as far as opportunities to reach the higher levels of our Army. Most of our higher levels are infantry, armor, and field artillery officers, but there's plenty of opportunity to have a very successful career as a female in our Army today.
Women have been growing in population from the lower ranks to the higher, and it just takes time to grow that population. When I came in 19 years ago, as the general was referring, our percentages were lower. It was only 10.7 when I came in back in '75, but now we're at 12.9%, so you see an increase, plus we've grown. When I came in, there weren't any female general officers or colonels. Excuse me, there were colonels, but not in the combat arms, but nowadays you'll see a lot more women in those higher ranks.
Sergeant, same with non-commissioned?
I think so. The promotion potential that I've seen is equally as great for the man or the woman in the service. A soldier who performs their job, does well, takes the hard assignments, and takes the proper education, non-commissioned officer education schooling, will get promoted. I don't see any difference.
Is there a glass ceiling in the military for women?
I think there was previously, but the changes that have come about in the last couple of years have cracked the ceiling, and we continue to get these expanding jobs where there is no ceiling. For instance, in aviation, my branch, I could go up to be a brigade commander. I could be a general officer in aviation. The only ceiling I have is age or seniority. But I do believe there was one originally.
Colonel, why'd you go in the Army?
It was a matter of just economics. Back in '74, when I graduated from college, I didn't want to go back to school and get a master's degree. I wanted to do something with my life, something that I could get a lot of feeling from. So I thought, well, I'll get into a young executive program, but there were none for people with political science backgrounds like myself. And so I thought, well, what can I do for a couple of years that will give me some proficiency and a skill, give me something that's challenging, and something I can do relatively short term, but with the option of going long term. And I looked at the Army and said, this looks like a place where I can learn a lot of stuff.
Colonel Jantz is a combat officer. She's an aviator, and that's a combat branch.
Would the eyebrows shoot up when you said, I want to be a combat aviator?
No, sir. When it started, it was just, hey, would you like to fly helicopters? And I thought, well, that sounds like fun. I said, yes.
Then they gave you an insanity test.
I know they say helicopter's not supposed to fly, but it was just a matter of skill and keeping ahead of the machine. And where that aircraft goes, the battlefield these days aren't line by line. This is the war, this isn't the war anymore. It's all a three-dimensional, four-dimensional, because time gets put in as a dimension of the war. And so whether you're flying a logistically oriented aircraft or one that's going into combat, you're going to be subjected to the same type of rules of engagement. And that's what happens if you're in a helicopter, a truck, or a land vehicle.
What does your current job entail?
I'm a liaison to Congress. I work aviation programs and ammunition programs as an Army officer, talking to members of Congress and the staffs of the professional committees up on the Hill.
Do you find that engaging work?
I find it challenging. I find it totally engaging my brain cells, and something that I had opted for. I competed for that position, and I was lucky enough to win it.
Sergeant, why did you enter the Army?
I was out of high school, wasn't sure what I wanted to do for the next few years. I talked to a recruiter, and he made the Army sound like an interesting choice. So I joined up and been enjoying it ever since.
Did you get an education along the way?
I've had the opportunity to go to school, yes, while I've been in.
Did you expect that when you went in?
No, I did not. But the Army wants its soldiers to be educated, so they make great opportunities. They have tuition assistance programs along with the GI Bill and other benefits, and they really encourage soldiers to go out and get the education.
Give me the progression of your career from the time you went in. What'd you do first?
I went through basic training at Fort McClellan in Alabama, went out to language school in Monterey, California. My first assignment was over in Berlin, Germany. Spent 3 years there, had a wonderful time. Went back to Monterey, the Language Institute, where I was an instructor and platoon sergeant for about 4.5 years. Went back to Berlin for another tour, got to see the wall come down. And then I went on to the NCO Academy at Fort Devens, where I was an instructor at the basic non-commissioned officer course. And I'm currently assigned down at Fort Meade. I am the operations and training non-commissioned officer in charge for my battalion. We plan and coordinate all training events, qualification ranges, whatever.
Soldier skills?
Soldier skills, thank you. Common military training subjects.
And you find it interesting?
It's very challenging, very interesting.
New field for you?
No, not really. As you progress up in the enlisted ranks, and when you get more and more away from the hands-on jobs and more into the paperwork side of the house.
Sergeant Woodrow is one of those examples of women soldiers teaching other soldiers, because she's one of the people, as she said, that's giving them the basic skills and indoctrination to the military. And so what we have now are women in those positions where we didn't see them before. Before, women did the lower level stuff. And when you looked back in the 70s, most of the women were, I think, from age 23 to 35. But now, as women have been more senior, we see that the age of the women in the military has gone to 35 to 45 for the majority of the females. And Sergeant Woodrow is one of those successes.
Colonel, did you feel that you had to work harder than a male to get where you've gotten?
Yes and no. Yes, in the circumstances that when I first came in the military and went into aviation, I was the only female in a class, and I would get a lot of visibility. People would come down and say, hey, we got a female in this class, let's see how she's doing. And so it made it part of my agenda to make sure I always did well, but I'm not one that always goes for the gold. I can go for the bronze. So I didn't put too much artificial pressure on myself, but I think that when you're in a situation like any pilot or any soldier, it's not based on whether you're male or female, it's whether or not you do your job well individually. And that's anybody coming into a new situation. You go out, you prove yourself, you know the mission, you know the skills it takes to do that, and then you get accepted.
Sergeant, your experience parallel to Colonel's?
Yes, it's exactly the same thing. I think people, male and female, respect you for how well you perform your job. They don't, I haven't had too many experiences with males who say, well, you're a woman, therefore you shouldn't be here. You don't belong in this line of work. If you go in every day, you perform your best, then you get accepted, you get the respect that you deserve based on your skills and abilities.
In the Army, you have a wide spectrum of opinion where you would in any type of community. And there are some that see change, any sort of change, as perhaps not the best for that institution. However, I think the majority of the opinion that I've always heard is, hey, what's taken you so long? Or, well, of course. Or, oh, I'd want my daughter to have the same opportunity that you're struggling to get right now. And I think that's one of the major successes in the Army, is that we can capitalize on that change, on the orientation.
The Army became the really first integrated sector of our society.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else is still catching up, the Army and the armed services. And I wonder about the whole role of discipline and equality, even though...
That's all personality driven, so that's your chain of command enforcing the right rules, and I'm sure the General, Sergeant Woodrow, could back me up on this, is that discrimination or any other type of negative personal attitude can be eradicated by the correct command climate.
Did you ever get to a point where you wanted to chuck it and get out?
Sure.
What happened?
I said,
what caused it?
I thought of my sisters, and I thought, they don't have to sit on wooden latrines with a sandstorm whirling around them. They don't have to go trudging around looking for a cat hole in the middle of a godforsaken desert. There have been areas where you're out flying around and somebody's giving you a hard time on technique, and you just say, okay. But I'm not a quitter, and I don't think any of the women or the men that make it to the senior places are. You just say, hey, I'm not going to let this get me down. And if my sisters are out doing shopping or being a teacher or whatever, that's their success. But my success is to be good with the skills I was given by God. And that's what I want to do out there.
Sergeant, you ever come close to chucking it?
No, because this is a decision I made that I wanted to stay in, retire from the military, and I tell myself when I stop having fun, I'll get out, and I haven't wanted to get out yet.
What are the most significant changes you've seen in the Army in the last 10 years that have affected you?
Well, I think the one I've seen the most in the last 10 years is that people in America, the civilians, when they see women in the uniform, they don't take it as, wow, look, there's a woman in the Army or a woman in Department of Defense. They see it more as, oh, hey, there's a female soldier, because it's more commonplace now. And I think that's what we've won in the last 10 years, is more of an acceptance as a viable member of the military, rather than just an anomaly of, hey, there's some female in uniform, obviously she couldn't cut it in the civilian world, so she's in the military. That old chestnut of a fallacy is no longer valid. And I think what we've seen in the last 10 years is that women in the military in uniform are a credible part of that organization.
I agree 100%. And also because as more and more positions open up to women, you have more women in senior leadership roles. So you have more role models for high school girls thinking about maybe joining the military. They don't just see these old male sergeants, crusty old sergeants, but they see women out there, senior women, being that role model for them.
If they asked you about that, what would you say about the matter of skills that they would acquire in the Army, that when their Army career was over, they could take to the civilian sector?
The one we really capitalize on in the military is teamwork. And in any organization, from the very smallest to its larger components, it's the building blocks, the teamwork. And I think what we bring the most is a maturity to be able to be flexible and that we can get along with one another, because we are certainly in situations where that's all you have to count on is your buddy or your coworker. And I think that's one of the best things we bring is to the workforce, life after the Army.
Is there life after the Army?
I certainly hope so.
What did Desert Storm do to the perception of women in the military?
It became very visible to the American public that women are a very important part of the active Guard and Reserve force that make up our America's Army and our civilian workforce that's part of our Army. And it was visible on TV daily. And when you take a look at the percentages of the soldiers that were involved and our civilians involved in that conflict, you'll see just the numbers alone tell you that women are a very doggone important part of America's Army.
You saw women soldiers in very non-traditional roles. Instead of sitting behind the desk and doing the paperwork for the war, the build-up to that, they were out there on the ground with the males, side by side, doing, fixing the tanks or working on the ground. They were just one part of the big team.
Everyone thought that when women would come back in caskets, that America would reel in horror of it all. But they didn't. They understood that these women had signed up and were deployed and could have a possible outcome.
The force mission changes as we enter the 21st century, and more emphasis is placed on technology. Doesn't that have a tendency to just drag down these pre-existent barriers between what women can do and what they can't do?
Well, absolutely. You have technology innovations which will overcome some physical limitations. For instance, as you say, lugging around a 90-pound rucksack or a 130-pound rucksack. Well, we've got things that are built to be lightweight and for a percentile that fits more of the women that are in the military. In the beginning, when you took an item like a truck, you weren't looking to say, okay, we want to fit not 5 to 95% female. You wanted to just fit the normal male soldier. But now we have tolerances that include that 5 to 95% female. So if you're a 5'4" female, you can drive a 10-ton truck, a 5-ton truck with just the same ease as someone who's perhaps 6 feet tall, because we are putting those innovations into the military. And the same thing goes with lugging around boxes of files. We don't do that anymore. We have floppy disks. So the technology has brought us to a more gender neutral condition or environment.
Right now, 67% of our positions in the Army are gender neutral positions. Those other 33% are positions that are related to direct ground combat. Those positions are not planned to open up to females at this time. As we continue to mature and we get more modernized and more innovative, who's to know what the future might hold in those areas. We've opened up 41,000 positions roughly in the last 6 months to females, and I think the Army's going to continue to analyze the situation just like we have over the history of the United States Army and do what's in the best interest of soldiers and the responsibility that the Army has.
What is mixed gender basic training?
It's new for the Army in that we have finally decided that something we tried a number of years ago that didn't pan out right is the right way to go. As we increase the positions and the numbers of women coming into our Army, the Chief of Staff decided that we ought to look at trying to put male and female in the same platoons at our basic training sites at Fort Leonard Wood and Fort Jackson, so they can be trained together and to the same standard. And by the time they finish their basic training, they have worked together, they've learned to live together, and we end up with a product that tells us that the Army's better off as we complete our graduates and they go off to their advanced individual training and get to their units. And we've now gone through a cycle that is proven that our goals of graduating males and females that feel better about working together and with each other is proven to be true. We did a couple of trial runs at Fort Jackson and then at Fort Leonard Wood that got us back into looking at the trainers. See, you can do a whole lot on training soldiers, but if the trainers aren't prepared to teach the right way, and we don't have enough, I don't know if that's the right term, but we'd like to have more female drill instructors. That's a challenge. And we've got to train our male drill instructors how to deal with female soldiers. Many of them come from the combat arms and have never had women assigned to their units because they were involved in direct ground combat. So the challenge is the trainer and the numbers of female trainers we have. And we're going to continue to get better and better each time we complete a cycle with our basic training.
Where was this going to go in the next 4 years? Are you all just waiting to see what the military size is going to look like, or you just have to go on and plan that this is going to be an increasing element of America's Army? There are going to be more women, if not more women. The women there in different positions, maybe higher positions.
I think we're all looking forward to everything that's going to be changing. I know myself, I just keep thinking, well, where else can the Army send me that I can have fun, adventure, and all that stuff you don't get back home watching the soaps. And every time I go to a new job, that's what I get.
We've eliminated and gotten rid of a few obstacles and restrictions, false barriers for our females by opening up positions in fields that were open to females but not units. And so not only do we have women today in our aviation, we have women today in our maneuver brigade headquarters, which we've never had before. Lots more places that they can serve in. And as the Army continues to possibly get smaller and as time goes on, do I envision more females in the Army? Yes, I sure do. But it's tougher to recruit females than it is to recruit males. It's twice as hard. The propensity for females to want to come into the service, any service, is half of what it is for our young males. So we have to work harder at it. And the Army is working harder at it.
I didn't know. Do you have a mandate to have a certain quota?
No, we have no mandate for a particular quota, but we sort of have a floor that we would like to meet every month, and the Army moved it up to 18% this past year for our enlisted soldiers. We're trying to recruit at least 18% of our females sessions every month, and we're getting pretty close to that. But if you didn't have a floor out there for us to do that, then we might not be trying as hard to do that.
What are you telling them? What are you offering them? What are you promising them?
We're promising them that they'll be challenged, that they'll be able to compete based on what they do, and giving them lots of opportunities. 67% of our positions in the Army are open to females.
Any push that you can sense that maybe your superiors don't sense among the non-commissioned ranks for a greater role?
I don't see thousands of women rushing to get into a infantry unit. I think they're satisfied that progress is being made, that more and more positions are being opened to them, and if in the future they decide to open up further combat positions or more positions in direct combat areas, there may be women who want to go into there.
I mentioned maneuver brigade headquarters. The maneuver brigade headquarters really doesn't do direct ground combat. It's the battalions that are under the brigade that do the direct ground combat. But yet in the past we had a risk rule which eliminated the possibility for a female to serve in that brigade headquarters staff? Well, this past year, Secretary of the Army, Secretary of Defense allowed us to open up brigade headquarters in those MOSs, in those positions, those military occupational specialties where women were already serving in a different capacity, but that position is open now in the brigade headquarters, maneuver brigade headquarters, for them to serve in.
I believe we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, Brigadier General R. Dennis Kerr, Lieutenant Colonel Megan Jans, and Master Sergeant Ramey Woodrow. For more than 20 years, women in Army Green have helped to sustain the strength and readiness of the world's premier fighting force, America's all-volunteer Army.
You never can tell where your shining lights are, and we're very proud of what our female cadets have accomplished. If you look at the old guard today, Lieutenant Hazelton, graduate of the ROTC program, University of Maine, MP officer, dynamite young lady, first female officer in the old guard.
If I stay in 5 years, I'll be a captain, I'll be a company commander, and I'd like to be in a division MP company, because those have just been opened up to women as well in the MP field. So I see myself in commanding a division.
When you talk to her and you look in her eyes, you see the leaders of America's Army in the 21st century.
We already see the Army changing to meet the needs of a refocused national defense. One thing that will not change, however, is the commitment of American women to serve their country in the uniform of America's Army. I'm Sandra Van Oker for America's Army.
Thanks for watching this video from the U.S. Military Channel. We invite you to like, share, comment, and subscribe today.